Hi there. So today we're continuing with L. Frank Baum's American Fairy Tales, written back in the 1800s. You got to remember when he wrote these stories in the mid 1800s, there were no telephones, there were no cars, electric street lights, communication, TV. I mean, even in big cities, everything was still horse-drawn carriages and police walking a beat with whistles and stuff. So none of the modern conveniences when these stories were written, which makes them more fun. Today's story is called The Enchanted Types. Let's begin. One time a Canuck became tired of his beautiful life and longed for something new to do. The Canucks have more wonderful powers than any other mortal folk, except perhaps the fairies and the rills. So one would suppose that a Canuck who might gain anything he desired by a simple wish could not be otherwise than happy and contented. But such was not the case for Popopo, the Canuck we are speaking of. He had lived thousands of years and had enjoyed all the wonders he could think of. Yet life had become as tedious to him as it might be to one who was unable to gratify a single wish. Finally, by chance, Popopo thought of the earth people who dwell in cities, and so he resolved to visit them and see how they lived. This would surely be fine amusement, and serve to pass away many wearisome hours. Therefore, one morning after breakfast, so dainty that you could scarcely imagine it, Popopo set out for the earth, and at once was in the midst of a big city. His own dwelling was so quiet and peaceful that the roaring noise of the town startled him. His nerves were so shocked that before he had looked around 3 minutes, he decided to give up the adventure and instantly return home. This satisfied for a time his desire to visit the earth cities. But soon the monotony of his existence again made him restless and gave him another thought. At night people slept, and the cities would be quiet. He would visit them at night. So at the proper time, Popopo transported himself in a jiffy to a great city, where he began wandering about the streets. Everyone was in bed. No wagons rattled along the pavements. No throngs of busy men shouted and hallooed. Even the policemen slumbered slyly, as there happened to be no prowling thieves abroad. His nerves being soothed by the stillness, Popopo began to enjoy himself. He entered many of the houses and examined their rooms with much curiosity. Locks and bolts made no difference to Canuck. He saw as well in darkness as in daylight. After a time, he strolled into the business portion of the city. Stores are unknown among the immortals, who have no need of money or of barter or exchange, so Popopo was greatly interested in the novel sight of so many collections of goods and merchandise. During his wandering, he entered a millinery shop, and was surprised to see, within a large glass case, a great number of women's hats, each bearing, in one position or another, a stuffed bird. Indeed, some of the most elaborate hats had 2 or 3 birds upon them. Now, Canucks are special guardians of birds and love them dearly. To see so many of his little friends shut up in a glass case annoyed and grieved Popopo, who had no idea they had purposely been placed upon the hats by the milliner. So he slid back one of the doors of the case and gave a little chirruping whistle of the Canucks that all birds know well, and called, "Come, friends, the door is open, fly out." Popopo did not know the birds were stuffed, but stuffed or not, every bird is bound to obey a Canuck's whistle and Canuck's call. So they left the hats, flew out of the case, and began fluttering about the room. "Poor dears," said the kind-hearted Canuck, "you long to be in the fields and forests again." Then he opened the outer door of them and cried, "Off with you, fly away, my beauties, and be happy again." The astonished birds at once obeyed, and when they had soared away into the night air, the Canuck closed the door and continued his wandering through the streets. By dawn he saw many interesting sights, but day broke before he had finished the city, and resolved to come the next evening a few hours earlier. As soon as it was dark the following day, he came again to the city, and on passing the millinery shop noticed a light within. Entered, he found 2 women, one of whom leaned her head upon the table and sobbed bitterly, while the other strove to comfort her. Of course, Popopo was invisible to mortal eyes, so he stood by and listened to the conversation. "Cheer up, sister. Even though your pretty birds have all been stolen, the hats themselves remain." "Alas," cried the other, who was the milliner, "no one will buy my hats partly trimmed, for the fashion is to wear birds upon them, and if I cannot sell my goods, I shall be utterly ruined." Then she renewed her sobbing, and the Canuck stole away, feeling a little ashamed to realize that in his love for the birds he had unconsciously wronged the one of the earth people and made her unhappy. This thought brought him back to the millinery shop later in the night, when the two women had gone home. He wanted in some way to replace the birds upon the hats that the poor woman might be happy again. So he searched until he came upon a nearby cellar full of little grey mice who lived quite undisturbed and gained a livelihood by gnawing through the walls into neighboring houses and stealing food from the pantries. Here are just the creatures, thought Popopo, to place upon the women's hats. Their fur is almost as soft as the plumage of the birds, and it strikes me the mice are remarkably pretty and graceful animals. Moreover, they now pass their lives by stealing and were obliged to remain always upon women's hats. Their morals would be much improved. So he exercised a charm that drew all the mice from the cellar and placed them upon the hats in the glass case, where they occupied the places that the birds vacated and looked very becoming, at least in the eyes of an unworldly Canuck. To prevent their running about and leaving the hats, Popopo rendered them motionless, and then he was so pleased with his work that he decided to remain in the shop and witness the delight of the milliner when she saw how daintily her hats were now trimmed. She came in early morning, accompanied by her sister, and her face wore a sad and resigned expression. After weeping and dusting the shop, drawing the blinds, she opened the glass case and took out a hat. But when she saw a tiny gray mouse nestling among the ribbons and laces, she gave a loud shriek, and dropping the hat, sprang with one bound on top of the table. The sister, knowing the shriek to be one of fear, leaped upon a chair and exclaimed, "What is it? Oh, what is it?" "A mouse," gasped the milliner, trembling with terror. Popopo, seeing this commotion, now realized that mice are especially disagreeable to human beings, and that he had made a grave mistake in placing them upon the hats. So he gave a low whistle of command that was heard only by the mice. Instantly they all jumped from the hats, dashed out of the open door of the glass case, and scampered away to their cellar. But this action so frightened the milliner and her sister that after grieving several loud screams, they fell upon their backs in the floor and fainted away. Popopo was a kind-hearted Canuck, but on witnessing all this misery caused by his own ignorance of the ways of humans, he straightway wished himself at home, and so he left the poor women to recover as best they could. Yet he could not escape a sad feeling of responsibility, and after thinking upon the matter, he decided that, since he had caused the milliner's unhappiness by freeing the birds, he could set the matter right by restoring them to the glass case. He loved the birds and disliked to condemn them to slavery again, but that seemed the only way to end the trouble. So he set off to find the birds. They had flown a long distance, but it was nothing to Popopo to reach them in a second, and he discovered them sitting upon the branches of a big chestnut tree and singing gaily. When they saw the Canuck, the birds cried, "Thank you, Popopo, thank you for setting us free." "Do not thank me," he returned the Canuck, "for I have come to send you back to the millinery shop." "Why?" demanded a blue jay angrily while the others stopped their songs. "Because I find the woman considers you her property, and your loss has caused her much unhappiness," answered Popopo. "But remember how unhappy we were in the glass case," said the robin redbreast gravely. "And as for being her property, you are a Canuck, and the natural guardian of all birds, so you know that nature created us free, to be sure. Wicked men shot and stuffed us and sold us to the milliner, but the idea of our being her property is nonsense." Popopo was puzzled. "If I leave you free," he said, "wicked men will shoot you again, and you will be no better than before." "Pooh!" exclaimed the blue jay, "we cannot be shot now, for we are stuffed. Indeed, 2 men fired shots at us this morning, but the bullets only ruffled our feathers and buried themselves in our stuffing. We do not fear men now." "Listen," said Popopo sternly, for he felt the birds were getting the best of the argument. "The poor milliner's business will be ruined if I do not return you to her shop. It seems you are necessary to trim the hats properly. It is the fashion for women to wear birds upon their headgear, so the poor milliner's wares, although beautifully by lace and ribbons, are worthless unless you are perched upon them." "Fashions," said the blackbird solemnly, "are made by men. What law is there among birds or Canucks that requires us to be slaves of fashion?" "What have we to do with fashion anyway?" screamed the linnet. "If it were the fashion to wear Canucks perched upon women's hats, would you be contented to stay there? Answer me, Popopo." But Popopo was in despair. He could not wrong the birds by sending them back to the milliner, nor did he wish the milliner to suffer by their loss. So he went home to think what could be done. After much meditation, he decided to consult the king of the Canucks, and going at once to his majesty, he told him the whole story. The king frowned. "This should teach you the folly of interfering with earth people," he said. "But since you have caused all this trouble, it is your duty to remedy it. Our birds cannot be enslaved, that is certain. Therefore you must have the fashions changed so it will no longer be stylish for women to wear birds upon their hats." "How shall I do that?" asked Popopo. "Easily enough. Fashions often change among the young people who tire quickly of any one thing. When they read in the newspapers and magazines that the style is so-and-so, they never question the matter, but at once obey the mandate of fashion. So you must visit the newspapers and magazines and enchant the types. Enchant the types, echoed Popo in wonder. Just so. Make them read that it is no longer the fashion to wear birds upon hats. That will afford relief to your poor milliner, and at the same time set free thousands of our darling birds who have been so cruelly used. Popo thanked the wise king and followed his advice. The office of every newspaper and magazine in the city was visited by Canuck, and then he went to other cities until there was not a publication in the land that had not a new fashion note in its pages. Sometimes Popo enchanted the type so that whoever read the print would see only what the Canuck wished them to. Sometimes he called upon the busy editors and befuddled their brains until they wrote exactly what he wanted them to. Mortals seldom know how greatly they are influenced by fairies, Canucks, and Rills, who often put thoughts in their heads that only the wise little immortals could have conceived. The following morning, when the poor milliner looked over her newspaper, she was overjoyed to read that no woman could now wear a bird upon her hat and be in style, for the newest fashion required only ribbons and laces. Popo, after this, found much enjoyment in visiting every millinery shop he could find and giving new life to the stuffed birds, which were carelessly tossed aside and useless. And they flew into the fields and forests with songs and thanks to the good Canuck who had rescued them. Sometimes a hunter fires his gun at a bird and then wonders why he did not hit it. But having read this story, you will understand that the bird must have been stuffed one from some millinery shop, which cannot, of course, be killed by a gun. There you have it. And that is the story of the Canuck. Very interesting. We'll keep reading L. Frank Baum's American Fairy Tales. I'm enjoying this, and I hope you are too. Until next time, we'll continue. See you later.